Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here as always with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo. And we've got some good guests coming up in the next month or so, but tonight is just going to be the three of us chatting it up. And we actually had a pretty good listener question submitted from Teresa that I'm gonna go ahead and read it out loud later. We're gonna talk about kind of how we've all come to be faster writers and more prolific, and how we're able to publish more often. Because I know a lot of people that maybe are on their first book or have a couple books out, are wondering when we say, yeah, the best marketing you can do is to publish a book every couple months. Most people are like, what? Every couple months is a little crazy. And I used to think the same way too, but it's kind of interesting how the line moves. So hopefully we'll be able to give some good advice on what we're up to and how we're making things work. But before jumping into that, guys, does anybody have any news they'd like to share?
I can go. I can say that I had a really good month for the month of April, but that's to be expected when you release not one but two books in the same month. And for me, that is that's exponentially insane. But I always tell the fans and the readers, like, don't get used to it. But yeah, I had a really good. One of those books was a pre-order, and it did really, really well, both on Smashwords and on Amazon. So if anyone wants to consider doing a pre-order, that's the way to do it. But I've already started getting reviews in for actually both books that I released in April, and thus far people seem to like it. So hey, I'm also really happy with that. Only thing I will say, if you ever do plan on releasing two books that close to one another, change up the title a little bit, because I've already messed myself up a few times. My Tales of Lantari #3, A Portal for Your Thoughts, and me and my Supreme Brilliance went Thoughts for a Portal for the second or the follow-up, just because I did that in the cliffhanger there. I can't tell you how many times I've referenced the wrong book, or I'm surprised I actually got the right ebook released with the right stupid document. That all that powers the thing. So forewarning, don't do that. Let's see. I have also got a little bit of news with regards to, if you ever want to increase your sales, um, run into your favorite YouTubers. Which, with me, I'm a huge Disney fan. I have wrote a short story called Disneyland Debacle, and as such, my wife and I, we really enjoy watching, these couple of guys that actually will walk through Disneyland and just chat about it, and they're big fans of Disneyland too. So I contacted them a while back and said, hey, I'm in this setting of this book that I'm doing, my A Portal for Your Thoughts. I'm looking for like the name of a store and possibly a couple of people to run the store. Do you mind if I make it a bakery? Because they're called Fresh Baked Disney. Do you mind if I make it a bakery called Fresh Bake? And can I use your two characters? Since they said yes, and as a result, we met up with them in Disneyland. I actually gave them a book, signed it for them there, and naturally the guy was filming the whole darn thing, so he posted it on his YouTube channel. He's got quite a few followers, and I noticed a huge uptick in sales from that as well. So even though my wife doesn't like being on camera too much, and I'm not exactly the most photogenic either, but it is a way to increase your sales there. Let's see. Right now, and the last thing I'll say is I'm hard at work on my 8th book, so things are progressing along smoothly. So that's it for me. Been a busy month, and I like it.
Were these, let me just ask you, these YouTube guys, is this a kind of a channel, like a podcast type of style that you follow
Yeah,
regularly?
yeah, kind of. It's yeah. If you look up Fresh Baked Disney on YouTube, or else if you literally go to freshbakedisney.com, it's a guy and sometimes a lady that that a girl that goes along with them, and they just go. They kind of experience the rides. They check out the food and say, this one's horrible, this one's good. Ye gads, this thing is a humongous price over there. But just all things Disney. So it's a lot of fun. We really enjoy it. I mean, we don't live anywhere near Disneyland, obviously, so since we can't go there as much as we like, we kind of watch them and kind of get a feeling on it. Kind of like you get to experience the park every single weekend, like these guys do. Oh, lucky turds. But
All right, well, that's definitely a different marketing tip than we've heard before, so that's pretty cool.
yeah, I never would have actually heard myself recommend that before, but it worked out quite well.
All right, Joe, how about you got any good news to share with us?
Yeah, I got some stuff. It's been a pretty good month for me too. I finished writing fourth, well, the sequel to the Book of Deacon trilogy, which is called The Decaran Apprentice, and I'm revising it right now. I have worked out a good way to keep track of how many words I've written, but I have not worked out a good way to keep track of how many words I've edited in a given day. So I don't know how close I am, but I know that I'm doing quite well with that. Um, I'm still riding the bump that I got from releasing my last book, Skykeep, and also the BookBub ad that I did the day after. So BookBub continues to have remarkable staying power if you can get into it. The new book is in pre-order, and it hasn't exploded out of the gate. Not that I expected it to, because the pre-order is going to be running for 7+ months, and it doesn't even have an official cover yet. So I imagine things will get better as it starts to look more like a book and less like a placeholder. And I finally, a long time ago, I was part of a Kickstarter anthology called Blackguards, and it finally, like with a Kickstarter, was a success, and I finally got my comp version. So the first ever hardcover, of which I am a part, is right here, and over here you can see my name on the spine. It's a little bit blurry, right there, 2 steps above and the rest. So I'm worthy of being listed, so that's good news. And I also was rejected for BookBub twice in 1 week, which is a new high for me. So that's not on the plus column, but it's still news.
Yeah, as awesome as we are, we don't have any insider any way to get extra BookBub ads.
Nope.
And let me take this moment to clarify. Teresa, the same gal who sent us a question on the writing being prolific stuff, wanted to know how to find BookBub and thought it was on BookPub, like P-U-B. So I just want to clarify in case anybody else can't understand our awesome English that it's bub, like Bravo Uniform Bravo, and it's just bookbub.com to get to their site. But I don't really have any. I guess I released a new book, so that's kind of news. A new book and a new series. It didn't really. It's doing okay. You know, I book 1, new series. You never know how much crossover you're going to get from people who really just want the next book in the series they're already committed to. But I actually had like my best earnings month ever in April, and I think that, you know, it wasn't really on new releases, because until this one, the last thing I had out under my name was in December. So the nice thing about having a lot of books in your catalog is you can kind of really go alternate every month and try to get ads and try to do advertising on different series. And so when you only have one series going and you can only kind of advertise the book 1 over and over again, that limits you somewhat. So, but when you have a lot of books out, if you have one thing that starts doing really well, which is, you know, I've done 2 99-cent books, 3 book bundles. One I did on BookBub in January, which I'm still kind of riding that. That's the only one I ever had. I talked about before that that really stuck and did well. And so because of that, and that did well in Nook too. So I've had like great earnings on Barnes & Noble, which never really happened before. I'm going to be sad when those go away. But so that helped get a lot of new people checking out my other series too. But then I also did, I already had a box set for my Emperor's Edge series, but I redid the cover on it. As I've mentioned before, I'd love to redo the covers on all 8 books eventually, but that's a little more of a monetary commitment, and it's tough to find an artist you like and everything. So I just did a real basic kind of, you know, fantasy with a dagger on the front, new box set cover, and you know, it started selling better even when it was at $3 or $7.99, I think it was. But then I did get a BookBub ad, and it didn't do as well as the other one. Not surprisingly, because it's been on BookBub before, and it's, you know, old news and maybe not as wide of appeal. I don't know, but it's been out there for a while. But it still did well enough, of course, to pay for the BookBub ad, you know, which was, I don't know, for 99 cents in fantasy, I want to say it's something like $200, $250, around that ballpark. So it sold well over 1,000 copies on Amazon the day it went out. And it's been doing well enough still that it's really helped boost the series. That particular series, I have 5 more books and more that people can go on and buy at full price. So I just wanted to, you know, kind of point this out as an example of just once you get more books and more series out there, if you do have something that kind of takes off a little bit from a successful ad or a successful YouTube Disney channel mentioning you, you know, it's really great to have a lot more books out there that people can go on and buy, because it just, like I said, I didn't have any new releases until the very end of the month, so I really think it's the ads and stuff and having lots of books in that series for people to go on and try that helped out. So there's a lot to be said for just getting more books out there and plugging away at the advertising and marketing and stuff. So now that I've babbled about that, we are going to try to kind of talk about some tips for improving your writing speed, like what we've done, and sort of maybe our process for plotting a little bit. And I'll go ahead and read Teresa's question because she was nice enough to write in. So we're going to talk her up here on the show. But she said, I wanted to ask if you, Joe, and Jeff have done any discussion of how you plot, or if you would consider it for a future topic. I know that might not be a marketing topic, but as I was listening to the A.W. Exley interview and to the previous episode on newsletters, I loved hearing about authors doing 2 to 4 books a year. For me, that's a great goal to strive for, and I wonder if you all have any suggestions for plotting or storytelling that help you get that amount of writing done. I've just finished my 3rd novel, but my process is more like 12 to 24 months, and I am curious about how you all approach it. So I guess first off, guys, let's just go ahead and get started and kind of talk about how we plot and whether we're outliners or pantsers. I don't know who wants to go first. It's on the next page. Jeff's going to go first.
Okay. Me personally, I'm an outliner. I've tried one of my first books just to pretty much ignore the outline and just try to do it by the seat of my pants. And I definitely get a lot more accomplished when I have a focused goal in mind. Now, bear in mind, I don't outline every last little detail. I've got my notebooks handy there, usually a blank notebook per book, essentially. And I jot down essentially the plot points I want to cover. If I think of something cool that I want to do, I'll put that in that notebook. But usually I have an idea of what I want to do for every single, what goal I need to accomplish for every single chapter, and I'll have a couple of ideas in there. But usually, by the time I hit that chapter, I take like the night before, I'll kind of sketch it out, saying, okay, you should start off. Opening scene is this, opening scene is that. Then they're going to do this, this, that, and I'll flesh it out as I go. And I can usually do a chapter a day when I actually sit down, and there's no interruptions, there's no distractions, no anything. And once I do that, then yeah, it is much more, what's the word I'm looking for? It is much more advantageous for me, and I get a lot more accomplished. You left your mic on there, Lindsay.
Of course I did.
But so for me, yeah, I'll outline. I don't outline everything, but I will have an outline that I will follow. And if I don't have one, I've noticed I don't get squat done. So for me, it's outline.
As for me, I've done it both ways, and one of my books, I can say broadly speaking, outlining makes for a faster writing process for me. But more often than not, I find that when I outline, I don't always end up following it tightly. Because an example would be for the sequel to my sci-fi book, the second, which is Unstable Prototypes. I sat down and I did a chapter by chapter description. Like there's gonna be 30 chapters. Chapter 1's gonna be this. Chapter 2's gonna be that. And I found that as I did that, it flowed very quickly, and I didn't have to think too much about where I was going to go next. But I also found that stuff I thought would take an entire chapter didn't take nearly a chapter, and stuff that I thought would take 2 or 3 chapters sometimes collapsed into each other. So I'm not that great at outlining, and also I find I'm kind of an enthusiastic writer. So when I outline things, when I even try to outline things, which I tried to do for this current book, I will get about 3 or 4 chapters into the outline, and then my outline starts to be 15, 20, 30 pages long, and I just start writing. So I'm primarily a pantser, but I still do a little bit of, like, I know the beginning, middle, and end. I know here's where everyone's going to start, which is usually easy in a series. Here's where everyone's going to end, and here's a handful of events that I want to occur. So it's like 20% outline, 80% pants for me.
All right, for me, and as you all know, my dog just came into the room, and she's happy to see you all. For me, I started out as kind of a pantser, and I should say it took me 7 years to finish my first book. So for those out there that feel they're slow, you're not. And what that was with me is I wrote the first book, probably fairly quickly, but over like a year, let's say. And then I didn't like the ending, and I was like, I don't know, I'm going to change the ending. So I shoved it to the side for like 5 years and played EverQuest and totally forgot about writing for 5 years. Might have been World of Warcraft, whatever was out then. But I came back to it, and then I rewrote the ending and got back to it. But so that's kind of what happens when I pants. Sometimes if I don't know the ending when I get started, there's a lot more chance I'll get stuck. These days I'm kind of just dedicated to it because it's the day job, it's how I earn a living and everything. So that tends to, you get in the habit if you write every day and just grinding it out. But I've definitely moved on to outlining, and I kind of think we're Rachel Aaron from she's written the book 2K to 10K, talking about how many thousand words she would write a day. And just knowing other people were writing that much kind of inspired me. And I think we're going to have her on as a guest. She just answered my email, so probably look for that in a few weeks to talk about marketing and outlining books. But so outlining, big thing that's helped me. And what I'll do is, if I actually do a really good outline, like I tend to do linear. I know some people do other methods of outlining, but that's just how I think. I want to know, like, this scene follows this scene, follows this scene. Then I just find it so much easier to actually sit down and write the scenes. I already know what's going to happen. And, I'll occasionally deviate and things will change. But if I have the ending written out and I kind of have that in my mind when I start writing, that really helps a lot. So definitely recommend outlining, especially if you're kind of struggling. If you know exactly what it is you have to write when you sit down to write, then you don't end up screwing around and checking Twitter and waiting for inspiration. And what I'll often do is, I think we're going to talk about this next, but just figuring it out in advance really helps. In addition to doing, like, outlining the manuscript ahead of time, I will kind of, like, whatever I'm going to work on tomorrow, I'll sort of scribble it down in my iPhone, just in the notes setting, either while I'm, like, if I'm at the gym. If you do something like repetitive, like jogging on the treadmill or the elliptical or something, or walking the dog, it seems like for me a really good place to kind of plot out the next couple scenes and figure out what's going to happen next. I guess that answers that question, that part of it. The next section, do you guys, I guess I kind of led into this, do you guys work out the beats for scenes before you write them, or do you just kind of go with the flow?
Like I say, for me personally, is I'll know, for instance, what I'm supposed to, what the chapter is supposed to be about, what roughly I'm supposed to cover. But the day before I'll actually write it, I'll actually take my old-fashioned notebook and I'll just sit there and I'll just kind of sketch out, kind of like a movie scene, sketch out, okay, this person appears here, this person says this causes a little tiff here, or chase scene over here. I mean, I will actually write out what theoretically should happen there, and sometimes I'll deviate, as most people actually do there. But for the most part, I usually will follow, what I had written out the day before. Yeah, because like when I'm originally sketching out ideas for or books in general, I won't go into that much detail. I'll just kind of give, like, okay, chapters this, chapter this, chapter this. But the day before I write the chapter, that's when I'll flesh everything
out. As for me, I guess I work out the beats when only when I'm doing a really thoroughly outlined story. When I'm in my normal means of writing, I know what the next scene is going to have, and it's usually each of my scenes is centered around a single like sort of main idea. So I have that planned out, but I don't go too much into the specifics of who's going to show up and when. Like it flows together a little bit more by the seat of my pants in that regard. That's not the case when I'm doing something on a time limit like NaNoWriMo. NaNoWriMo, I tend to plot out what tomorrow's writing is going to be once I finish today's writing, which is almost necessary since NaNoWriMo is so tight. I don't usually have a lot of time to let things stew. I have to get them out and get them ready. So that's an example, I suppose, of if I really need to write quickly, then I do the beats. But even so, it's not like I don't take physical notes of what's going to be coming up. But another thing I'll do for the overall story to make sure that pacing and everything is good, I tend to have a couple of unsorted scenes, a few things that I think would be cool to include that don't necessarily need to fit into any specific portion of the book. So maybe I'll have a handful of action scenes or a handful of character development dialogue scenes. And when I'm reading through the draft and doing my first revision, if I see, well, this is starting to drag, or there's been a whole lot of action and not a lot of, it needs to be chopped up, then I'll take one of my floating scenes and slide it in to maintain pace. So I do have some free-floating, free radical beats out there when I need them, but overall, I tend to just sort of go with the flow.
All right, and I kind of confessed already that this was probably only the last year and a half that when I really tried to bump it up from 3K a day to, like I was saying, sometimes I'll do 10K. That's pretty rare. Usually it's when I'm feeling guilty, like I'm squeezing some new project in when I have 3 other things I should be working on, then I'll try to write the new thing really quickly. But even if you're writing 5,000 words a day, and I know if you're working full-time and don't have a lot of time, that maybe is 1,000 words a day. That was my first goal, is just do 1,000 words a day. But I've definitely found it's helped, because I know when I don't do that, when I don't kind of work out what's going to happen in the next couple scenes before I start writing them, it still happens. I still get them down, but I'll kind of look and like, gosh, it took me a long time today to get to my word count goal. Whereas if I like really have it already in my head what exactly is going to happen, it seems to be much quicker to get to, like, let's say 5,000 words. And one thing I didn't really mention in our notes here, but we'll definitely talk about if we get Rachel Aaron on, is one of the things she talks about in her 2K to 10K book, and I'll put a link to that book in the notes here today, is that it's not just, outlining, I think, was one of the things she mentioned, but really being excited about what you're going to write that day. Like, for myself, as an example, I just finished my 5th Dragonblood book, which is a steampunk series, kind of a very late, like they have a kind of World War I style airplanes in this series, so I have to write these epic airplane battles, which is actually kind of fun because it's different from most of the other ground-based fantasy I've done. But at the same time, battles and stuff, I'm like, I'll write it because you got to have those in there. But the dialogue is more the thing I really enjoy, and the character stuff. But I was thinking, how can I make this more fun so I'm more excited to write about this? And the reader's going to be more excited too if you do some fun stuff. And I just had this vision of my heroic pilot character like hanging from his fingertips because he lost his plane, and he's got all this sorcerers trying to kill him and stuff, and he's timing this jump to escape down. You have to read the book to know what's going on. But he falls 20 feet and jumps on the enemy aircraft and kicks the pilot out. And it's totally this Hollywood BS that would never happen, right? But you get to do this in fantasy. You got magic and stuff, so it works. So it ended up just kind of being a real fun scene for me to write because it's just so crazy, and he's a crazy character. And so I would say that would be one more recommendation I have, is really kind of when you're sitting down to figure out how the next scene is going to go, if you're not that excited about writing it, that can be one time when it's hard to get the words down when you're just like, they're just traveling in a covered wagon from A to B. What can you do that's related to the plot but still is exciting and is going to make it more fun to write? So yes to beats, and yeah, if you can, find that one thing that's really exciting in there to excite you. That's my word for today. Exciting and excite. All right, next question. We've kind of been talking about this, but we're just saying, what are some things we've done now to increase how much we're able to write per day and how quickly we can finish a novel?
Well, anyone that knows me, I used to be one of the one novel per year thing, and I was figuring, you just got to better organize your time, and for me, this is what I've learned to increase the word flow. First and foremost, get away from the internet unless you're doing an internet or a research type thing there, and if you do, just make it as short as possible, because I am easily distracted. So very easily distracted. I used to think I could have some noise on in the background, like a radio or maybe like a TV or something going on there. Oh no. Again, easily distracted. So no TV, no nothing. No noise, no radio, no nothing. Just my nice little quiet room here where I'm sitting now. That's where I write there, and there cannot be any interruptions, because literally all it takes is a shadow to pass across the window. They're like, ooh, what's that? And train of thought's gone. And like you might have noticed me there like a couple minutes ago, I saw a big shadow go across there. I'm like, what do we have, a pterodactyl going across there? It was a turkey vulture, but I was like, wow, ooh, cool, shiny objects. So for me, it's minimum distractions. I have my notebook handy. I've got it propped up next to my printer here so I can read it and follow along. Caffeine, oh yeah, I've got my soda over here on my right, so to keep me awake, and that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with the minimal distractions thing. The difference for like my minimum for, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but my minimum for a day is 3,000 words if I'm actively writing a book, and I shoot for higher. And the difference between a 3,000 word day and a 6,000 word day is whether or not I start the day with the web page open. If I have any web page tabs, any internet browsing going on, then I'm going to lose 2,000 words that day. So definitely minimizing the distractions. Research you should do, research you have to do, but since that involves opening up the internet, I try to put all of my research together. I'll write down what I need to look up and do research in clusters instead of scattered throughout the day, just to reduce the chance that I'm going to look at Tumblr or something, or any of a dozen little time wasters like games and whatnot. Then you also want to set minimums. A minimum word count is something I didn't used to do because my old writing technique and the old programs I used made it I had to remember to check how many words, my total word count at the beginning of the day, and then subtract the new word count at the end of the day, and I perpetually forgot. So I was bad at minimums, but since I moved over to Scrivener and it's easier to keep track of that stuff, or basically since WordPress has started putting it in the status bar at the bottom, I've been setting minimums, and my minimum, as I said, is 3,000. And even when I don't hit 3,000, even when I fall just shy, I mean 2,800 or something, having a minimum guilts you into writing even when you don't want to, at least in my experience. So I find minimums are very important. And what's equally important is not setting a maximum. For a little while, particularly when I had multiple projects going on or a lot of side stuff that was book-related but not writing-related, I would sit until I got to 3,000 words, and I would have like 3,002 words for the day. I'd be like, okay, I should stop writing and go handle this promotion now. And that's not a good idea. Stop writing when you're done writing and you're over your minimum. If you're in a flow, you could get another 3,000 words in a day. There's no reason to interrupt yourself just because you hit the minimum number. So definitely minimums, but no maximums.
All right, sounds like good advice. I'll throw in a few of my own that I've heard from others and that have also worked for me. One is to kind of figure out what is the best time of day for you. I mean, sometimes you're just so busy that you got to fit it in whenever you can. You know, whether that means keeping a notebook with you or just. I have a friend. Actually, we had her on the show, Becca and Andre. That she goes to all her kids' basketball games and all these sporting and music things and stuff, and she's always there. I think she finally got like a Mac Air or something, but she was just writing her whole manuscript out in longhand, and then she'd type it over there whenever she got a chance. So that's definitely, whenever you can get the time, go for it. But I've kind of found, even though I'd never thought of myself as a morning person, I've been a night owl transitioning, trying to keep a better schedule. But I found recently that if I just get up a little earlier and go get my coffee, make my latte or whatever, and come back, I'll even go just take my laptop to bed because I do everything on my laptop, and sit there and try to write like 1,000 or 2,000 words before anything else gets going. Then it's just so much easier when let's say you're taking your kids to school and blah, 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 or you got to work in the mornings, whatever it is, when you do get back to it, if you've already got X number of words down, it's like, oh, this is much easier now to hit my goals. And I totally agree with Jeff that it's so easy to get sucked into the internet that I've known some authors who will just have a specific computer that they do their writing on that's not even hooked up to the internet. I haven't had to be that extreme that myself. That I'm pretty much, if I have a word count goal, I will get to it. But there are times when I'm kind of like struggling to find my focus. Maybe if I'm not as motivated as I'd like to write a scene, if it's not as exciting as I want it to be, then I'll either, I'll go ahead and set a timer. Like I usually just use Google timers. There's a site called Write or Die that a lot of people swear by, where you just say, hey, I'm going to write for 20 minutes and I'm not going to let myself do anything else. And I know that site in particular will start flashing at you, and you can have, in the hardest setting, it will even erase your words if you pause for too long. So some people find that to be a good incentive. One thing else that I'll do is I will, if at all possible, I won't like research something now. Like I was just saying, I'm just finished book 5 in a series, which means that I've forgotten all kinds of mountains and islands and names of things, and I'll just put in brackets. I'll be like, name of island, or something. Look this up later. I definitely recommend doing that when you're just trying to get the words down. When you go back and edit, that's the time you can insert the things that you've forgotten, or even make up a character name or something. I've done a few Bobs and just kind of funky character names that I know this sucks, and I'll come up with something good later. Just put it off for there. One other thing that I think really helped me is just, it helps when you start when you start making money. It's a really good motivation because you don't want that income to drop off every month. You want it to hopefully grow or at least not lose ground. So that can be good motivation. But until you get to that, one of the first things I did is just make the goal of, like I said, 1,000 words a day. I was still working full time at my other job then, and that's kind of what I could do. And you'd be surprised how quickly you can get that out if you're outlining and if you kind of already know what you're going to write ahead of time. But so kind of having a goal, and if you can do it every day or 6 days a week or something, it really does start to become a habit. And you start to feel, like Joe was saying, you feel really guilty if you don't get your words in. Like maybe the next day you'll work a little harder. But even if you just get some words in at least, it's just like, yep, got some words in, made some progress, and you would be surprised at how quickly 1,000 words or even 500 words a day can add up and give you a new manuscript. And I don't know if we actually set aside this talk about, but I know I'm actually going to throw it in here, you guys, just so get ready. I'm going to talk about editing, because I know one thing I did early on is I would go over and over and over my manuscript, trying to make each line, each sentence really pretty. At the time I was in a writing workshop, and that's just what everybody did, make these sentences really pretty. And I think maybe that's something with every writer goes through, is that you're first you don't know any rules, so you just write a whatever and it comes out quickly, and then you join a workshop or something and people are telling you can't use adverbs, you can't write in the passive voice, you've got all these things in your head, you need to use active verbs, and so you're really thinking a lot about the sentence structure. But then as you write more and as you get into it, you kind of internalize all that, hopefully. So it becomes easier, and then you realize too that some of the rules that people were pounding into your head are probably not that important, or I feel that for most of us, we're talking about science fiction and fantasy here. Most of us are writing kind of pulp fiction that we want to entertain people, rather than like these great literary masterpieces. So, I would argue that for most people, and if you're different, that's totally fine. I do know people that write literary fantasy, but the idea is not to get people to trip over the words. You kind of want them not to see the words. You want them to get immersed in the story and not have anything take them out of it. So the pretty sentences probably aren't as important as you think they are. So I would say that that is one thing that's really helped, is just the fact that I write my rough draft, I go through it once, then I send it off to beta readers. I just address whatever they had, and then I send it off to my editor. So there's no 7 editing stages or 7 versions going over it 7 times. And I think that, I edit more than like Dean Wesley Smith. If you've ever been to his blog, he's like, don't edit for anyone unless they can write you a check, But so what do you guys think? How many times do you go over your manuscripts and stuff? Do you feel also that you've kind of really cut down on your editing time as you've gotten more experienced?
My own process is I tried it once when I first started writing. Is I'd like write 3-4 pages. I'd give it to my wife and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because she's my primary proofer. And it quickly became, unless you give me a completed chapter, I don't want to read it, because you're not going to leave me hanging, for any particular point here. So she'll go through it, and that's when she'll say, okay, well, she'll get out her highlighters. This doesn't make sense, or this is a typo, or just I'll go through it. I'll just make a quick minor correction, and then once I do that, I'll move on to the next one. So I don't spend a whole lot of time on it. And then once everything, I go through all the chapters, and if she goes through all the chapters, and I make it to the end, then I'll turn around and give it to the beta readers, and just to see what they think of the thing there. So I don't spend too much time on it. I used to, but not anymore.
I have almost the same process as Lindsay. I will write from beginning. This is really since the first 3 books, which was one giant book that got sliced into 3 pieces. I probably read through 4 or 5 times. But since then, like starting with the 4th book, I would write it from beginning to end. I would read through, and like her, I will put when I can't think of the name of a place, or don't want to come up with the name of a place, or not sure if I answered this prior, I'll leave notes to myself in the text with big brackets around them so that they don't get left in. And but yeah, I'll write it all the way through once, and then I'll read it all the way through and address all of my own notes, and then off to the beta readers. I find I don't usually craft my sentences individually and get all prosy. I just try to make sure that they work correctly. Most of the things you should never do, like never use passive voice and don't overuse adverbs, I don't really pay attention to that. And I find that I have very seldom had someone tell me I use too many adverbs. So either I have good instinct or it's bogus. But yeah, one read through, write it, one read through, off to the beta readers. If it's a really rough one, if I feel like there might be some major problems, there'll be 2 rounds of beta readers. But again, it's just addressing their stuff. So yeah, I don't spend a tremendous amount of time editing. I'll spend the number of months I spend writing is equal to the number of days I'll spend editing. It's just much faster.
All right, and I know some of that comes with time and experience too. It's much easier for me to sit down and write a novel today than it was with the first or even the second book. I remember I still was like, I had to rewrite the whole middle section, and it does get easier with time. And I think if you need to edit, go ahead and edit. But I've definitely noticed when I go back and read my first book, it seems choppier and less smooth. And that was when I was going through the workshop and trying to do all the pretty sentences and that sort of thing. So sometimes I think when you're first learning something, you try so hard, it's almost like the reader can see you trying really hard, and just with more practice, it becomes easier. But
for
go
the
ahead.
record, yeah, for the record, I do the same thing where if I can't think of a mountain range, or if I can't think of a forest name, or I'm like, okay. And then he went to X, 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 and then I went there, and then Y, 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 and so that way, either I'll go back and catch it, or else the spell checker will catch it, or my wife will go, what is this? You forgot something here. But so yeah, I do that all the time too. If I can't think of something, don't dwell on it. Make a little notation to myself and move on, essentially.
Yeah, your beta readers will be amused if you forget and send them. I've done that a couple of times where I'm like, name this town.
Oh yeah, I've done that too. Is that insert town name here, and they're like, do we get to pick our own and put that in there? Like, sorry, no, that one slipped by me.
All right, well, moving on. Since fantasy and science fiction readers, tend to really enjoy series, we always have all our world building and characters and epic plots that we're doing that a series can often make sense. Thought we'd kind of talk about how that can actually make it easier to be more prolific and get your books out sooner. So have you guys had that experience with your own series, that it's easier as you know the characters and the world already?
Yeah, I just noticed I didn't put any notes on this, but yeah, I I was like, wow, I missed that one. But no, I've noticed that as well. It's so much easier that you've already got the world established. You already, like I don't know how everyone else does, but like when I create a new world, I'll create kind of like a little map, so I have reference points. So it's like, okay, turn east, go to this town here and whatnot. So you don't have to worry about rebuilding all that. So the only thing I usually do typically is like when I'm starting a new book, if it's in the same series, obviously, is like, okay, well, this person who, like a quick little reminder of who he is, and going to this particular seaside village, and it's over on the west coast. And I mean, I'll just give them a quick little brief reminder, and I don't have to dwell on it because obviously, if you made it that far in the books, you already know full well the layout of the land or how things work, that sort of thing. So I don't really, I love adding to the series. It's so much easier.
Yeah, I agree. I find that stories have momentum. If you're like me, you are going to end a book with more threads than you tied up. So I always sort of, even if unintentionally, end up with stories remaining to be told at the end of every book. So they lead very well into each other. And once you've got an established setting, it means the subsequent stories are quicker to get to the chase because you don't have to do the groundwork again of establishing the rules of the world and you've already got interpersonal relationships set up. So that's handy. And I also find a good trick when you have a single series is if you make your series big enough, and I think like Terry Pratchett and Discworld, you can have one series that has got different isolated threads going through it, so it's like having multiple series for the price of one. In my case, stuff tends to be chopped up into eras, so there's the prequel stuff, and then there's the main story, and then there's the sequel stuff, and you can stick your stories in to fill any gap that exists. So yeah, having a strong enough series really makes it very, very fast to get going, and if you leave enough holes between stories, then you can very quickly churn out a new plot because you've essentially already got points A and C written, and you're just writing point B. So it's very, very handy to have a series.
Yeah, I've definitely found the same thing, that it's much like I was saying. I just finished my 5th book in this series, and that was like the first book was pretty quickly written because that was one of those things I was talking about where it was a side project that I wasn't really supposed to be working on. So I tried to write it pretty quickly, but some of the middle ones were okay, but this one came out really quickly. I also did a really good outline on it, so outlining, good thing. But when you really start to know the characters and you know all their quirks and you know the world, so you don't have to you just almost don't even have to think about these things. They're already there. You're living and breathing it. So that can really, especially if you're somebody that takes a really long time to do character sheets and actually do those things that are recommended. I'm a bit on the fly with that kind of stuff. So, but I think a series, if you haven't been thinking in series and you want to get more books out, start thinking, how can I write the next 6 books with these characters? And the readers really, it's a lot easier to market and sell them too, because the readers, once they've probably gone through their first 2 or 3, they're pretty committed to the series and will probably stick with you. So. All right, next question is actually a question, not just a point we wanted to talk about. This is actually from one of my beta readers who did not want to be identified. She's kind of incognito. So Sally Amazeballs, that's her name. She asked, do you ever get daunted or intimidated by your ideas and you're not sure if you can pull them off, so you falter or you get stuck? And if that happens, what do you do?
I didn't really put too much in my notes for this just because I usually, when I'm looking at story ideas, I'll actually think it out in my head saying, okay, before I even broach this, can I write the scenario or the solution to this, and does it make sense? Will it be believable or whatnot? So I have yet to find myself in that situation.
Uh, I can't say the same. I perpetually in that situation. I tend to have a whole lot of ideas, and quite frequently I will say the words, "I wish I was good enough to write this." Like I'm not smart enough to write the story that I just came up with. But the way I deal with it typically is to write it anyway. I just write whatever I can come up with. And if it doesn't come out good, well, then I see where the parts that don't work, because now they're in front of me instead of hypothetical. And if I don't know where a scene that I really want to write or I think is really complex will fit in, then I write it by itself and I make it one of those floating beats that I can stick in else, somewhere where they need it. But generally speaking, I feel like even when it's daunting, and even if you feel like you'll do a terrible job, do the job. And maybe you'll be wrong and it'll be fantastic, or maybe you'll be right and it was a waste of time. Except you still wrote it and you still got it out of your head. So I don't let myself get hung up on that stuff. I just let myself feel horrible amounts of self-doubt and ignore that.
All right, and for myself, I've actually, I totally admit that there are some kind of plot lines that are much simpler to write, and they'll probably come out faster for you if they come out faster for me. Kind of a straight up romance with just, uh, I don't know, one bad guy that has to be defeated kind of plot. It's very easy for me to write. I can write a novel in 2 weeks like that. It's just, and I've done another one. I'd probably say I was most daunted. I've got a couple of them. One was when I did Republic, which was the 8th book in my Emperor's Edge series, kind of an extra book after the series ended, and it had 6 point of view characters, and that was the first time I had done more than, I think, 2 point of view characters in a book. And it was, because one of my things that I hate about sometimes epic fantasy, especially stuff I've beta read that wasn't published yet, is that you have all these characters going on and the stories don't really seem to come together that well. They're just these individual stories and you're like, what's going on? So I really wanted to make mine all tie together and everybody had character growth and everything over the course of this 220,000 words or whatever it was. And I found that a daunting story just because the size of the cast and everybody having their own individual story within the big story. And I say my answer to that was just outline, figure out ahead of time how these are all going to come together. And it did take me much longer to write than a usual novel. And maybe that's something you accept if you're going to do something that's a little more complicated. Another way I've been daunted is actually the second novel I ever published was Encrypted, and the main character is a cryptanalyst and a philologist, which is somebody who studies dead languages. I don't know anything about these things. I had like a book called Code something, and it was a really cool book. I read it, but I remember thinking, and I also had this genius military strategist admiral for kind of the enemy / love interest guy, and I don't know anything about that either. So I had these really smart characters, and I found that very intimidating as an author. I mean, I'm just not as brilliant as these guys were, and I wanted to try really hard to make them seem authentic and to make them believable. And that's very much a book I could have said, I just don't think I can do this. These guys are really smart, and I'm not that smart. But I tried to do the research, and I wanted to tell the story badly enough that I did it anyway. And it ended up. It's one of my favorite books, even though it's like 20 books in the past now. So sometimes if you I say if you want to make it easy on yourself, just don't write that one yet. Put it off for later. You'll do that when you feel you're maybe stronger as a writer and have more experience. But like Joe was saying, if the worst that can happen is that you decide it's not something you're going to publish, but maybe you learn something about yourself or about your writing style in the process, and it may be worth tackling anyway. I would just say, definitely outline it. If you feel daunted, if you're not sure how characters are going to come out of this or how it's going to end, just figure that out ahead of time, and I think you'll find it much easier. It's so easy to get stuck if you don't know how the ending is going to end. So I don't know if you guys have any more thoughts on that, or
I've noticed. I was just thinking about this. The last set of books I did was like pretty much a two-parter for me. I actually got to the point where I, spoiler alert, time traveled them back to like the essentially 1880s, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to make this thing, as official as possible. I need to know what it was like then. So I actually found myself going to the library and checking out Old West, make sure I had the uniforms, perfectly right for the soldiers that were there. Maybe I was pulling up maps from the town, make sure I was describing the buildings right there. So that was one of the things that as soon as I got to that part of the story, I was like, maybe I should have thought that out first and been a little bit better prepared. But once I started, I couldn't cut that scene out, so I had to learn about it essentially. Because you were just mentioning that you didn't know anything about crypto. What is that? Philologist? I said the word. All right.
You did better than I did.
I remember that book. Yeah, I like that book too. There, but yeah, it's one thing when you're like your characters are supposed to be completely knowledgeable about all these subjects. I'm like, I don't know a freaking thing about this. Well, it's time to learn. So you can go to Google or go to the library or something.
Yeah, I can say that I have like the advice being write it and maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad. I literally have one full book and another half of one, which I wrote from beginning to end and decided this isn't worth putting out. And at the end of the year, it's going to be coming out because I'm going to be revising it over the course of this year. So this is an example where I didn't think I could write it. I wrote it, and I didn't think it was worth writing. And now upon review, I think it might be salvageable. So write it anyway.
Yep, you never know. And I guess one trick, it didn't work for me in that particular novel, but I've seen other people do it, especially Hollywood does it a lot, is if you've got some really smart characters, just don't make them the main character. You've got Sherlock Holmes, who's really brilliant over here. Fine, Dr. Watson's going to be the one telling the story. So using an everyday character as sort of the narrator can be a workaround if you are just it's easier to do those super smart characters if you're not in their head. So that's just one tip on that thing.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Or I had a couple of characters that were like, okay, I was thinking about it. Do I need to really explain how he knew that? I was like, well, they don't really need to know that. They just assume he's smart in that particular subject. I'm going to switch POVs over to this person who doesn't know anything about it. It's like, oh, that's cool. I'd really like to know how you did that. But okay, moving on. So I've used that option a few times before, and it comes in handy.
Definitely. All right, we're getting to the end here. We got a couple more topics to cover that we brought up. Kind of a question is, do you guys feel that motivation plays a big role for you? And if so, how do you find it? And how do you keep writing every day? How do you stay excited about it and just want to keep working at it?
Real quick for me, motivation would be just to know for myself that I can actually write a story interesting enough where someone looks at the cover, reads the blurb, and says, I want to read that. And how do I verify that? I just got to go to Amazon and look. And but to me though, it's encouraging every time I read a good review that someone says, hey, I really like the books. Keep them up. Fan for life. I just had someone that left me a review. I think it was on Barnes and Noble that said something about like, oh, I really love these books here. Love this new one here. He's got his own shelf now on my Nook. I'm like, huh, cool. I didn't know I have to get my own shelf there, but I appreciate that. Have enough books out where I can fill up a shelf. So that was really cool. So to me, the motivation is since I want to turn pro author here, is to make sure I can keep writing a story that someone will be interested in. So far so good.
Yep. In my case, motivation, there's three main motivators for me. The first one is that I did turn pro, so now that's how I buy my pretzels, is with the money from the books. So no books, no pretzels. Second is the fans. I get emails and tweets and stuff from fans, and they're eagerly awaiting the next thing, and I sort of feel like I'm letting them down if I don't get the stuff out to them as quickly as I can. So peer pressure and guilt trips, I suppose, is the second one. And the third one is ideas. I tend to have a tremendous number of ideas, and an idea is always most exciting when you are about to do it because you haven't started and there's no actual work involved. It's just this thing you want to do. So the next project is what gets me to finish this one because I'm like, oh, if I finish this book, then I can start working on that cool idea I have. So I don't know, a carrot on a stick, I guess, was the last one.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there because I'm usually about 2/3 of the way through the rough draft of something when I'm like, oh man, I totally would rather be writing this new idea that I have. And that can be, I always make myself finish a rough draft before I jump into something else. I might, after the rough, I might jump into something before I go back and edit the one, depending on how things went. Because sometimes a break can be a good idea, but I do try to, if you get once you get in the habit of finishing things, it gets easier to finish things. So definitely agree with Jeff that and Joe too that motivation, getting email from fans and people saying, hey, when's the next book coming out? That's super motivating. And before you get to that point, before you've published and you're getting an audience, I would just say it's more about making it a habit of writing every day. Sometimes you're not motivated. Sometimes you just gotta say, you know what, I said I'd do 1,000 words a day or 500 words a day, and I'm gonna go do that. And sometimes it's like I was talking about earlier, if you're just kind of bored or not that excited about the scene you have as it's planned, maybe you need to step back and think, gosh, what can I add to this scene to make it more fun to write? And because it's probably going to be more fun to read if you make it more fun to write. So, and one last thing I say is that a lot of people say like, oh, I don't feel good today, I'm sick, or I'm just not motivated, so whatever I read is going to be crap. It's probably not. I've definitely had days where I'm sick or just not into it, and when I go back and edit a month later or whatever, I cannot tell the difference between the days when I was like, oh, I was really excited to write that day, and oh, that scene, I was sick that day. They read the same. There's not really any difference as far as I can tell. So, give yourself, make it okay to write crap, but just know that it'll probably be fine. Or, sometimes it's hard to love what you're working on right now, but just know that later on when you look at it, it's probably better than you remember. So I think it's good to push ahead and keep doing it. And I'm going to hand the next question to Jeff because this was his question that he wanted us to chat about. Go for it, Jeff.
Real quickly, I would need to ask you about something I just heard you say just a little bit ago. You just said, get into the habit of finishing things. So now I have to ask.
This is not about a series. This is about individual books.
So I was like, I've been writing now for a little over 5 years. I've never once actually gone, yeah, heck with that one. Let's go start something new there. So it made me smile when I heard you say that. I was like, I wonder if she's actually done that once or twice, where you started a project, went, and you start with the next one there.
Well, as I say with series, if you're with somebody like spastic like me, it may take you 5 years to finish a series, and you may have 5 series going on at once, but I will finish a novel or the story I'm working on before I'm jumping to some other series or something else. But since I started outlining, I'm much better at finishing things. I definitely have, from my pre-publication days, I have lots of stories that I started, got like 30,000 words into and abandoned. I was much better. I tell you what, I quit playing World of Warcraft. I quit playing all sorts of games in like 2009 or something, and there was this correlation where suddenly I started finishing novels. So, you got to figure out where your priorities are and what's most important to you. So, for sure, I've abandoned stuff.
So my question is actually directed to you two because I haven't done this yet, but I'm thinking about it. So if you're essentially written in one series, and since for other authors that are out there that have done this, if you've written in one series and you're now trying to create a second series or something completely different, what things can be done once you say write this new book in this new series to try and get your established readers to try your new offering?
Well, I can say that, first of all, at least one thing is definitely going to be similar between the two, and that's the author. So I think one thing that's handy is when you're talking to your current fans about the new novel you have, is to remind them of the things that are in that one that they liked about the other stuff. So if it's character-driven, talk about that. If it's got a good sense of humor, then talk about that. And if you're like me, when you write multiple series, you tend to have a subset of character behaviors which are very common between, and I've had people more or less tell me that each of my series is just the same set of actors playing different roles. So overall, if somebody likes one thing that you wrote, they're probably going to like the other stuff you wrote because they like the way you write as opposed to not necessarily what you write. I would just point out the similarities between series.
All right, based on my experiences, I would say don't try to get them to switch over. I actually went from writing my Emperor's Edge series, which is kind of high fantasy / maybe steampunk, to about a year and a half ago, I published the first book in my Rust and Relics series, which is contemporary fantasy slash sci-fi, and it's in first person, very very common, very typical of like what's being published in urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, but very different from my third person high fantasy and another world stuff. And boy, I got some of the worst reviews on that book from my regular readers. They were like, I can't believe she wrote this. This is horrible. You know, I was like crushed. I was like, really? I didn't think it was that bad. I thought it was kind of okay. And you know what I found out is that maybe it's not the best book ever, but the people who read contemporary fantasy tend to be different group of people that read epic fantasy, and it started getting better reviews later on as people outside of my core readership found it. So now I have readers that follow that series, and I have readers that follow my Emperor's Edge series. I have a different set of readers that follows the airplane steampunk stuff I was talking about, and I wrote a contemporary sweet romance last year that like 5 people read, and you know, it's just going to be, you know, you can try. There's nothing wrong with it. I gave out a lot of review copies of that one when I first released it, hoping people would check it out. But looking back, I would actually just say I probably wouldn't even try that hard if it's really different. If you're still doing like high fantasy and it's very similar to what you're doing now, then I would just say, yeah, go ahead. And if you want, maybe you can even have it set in the same world or something, so there's a character tie-in. That might get people to check it out. But if it's really different, if you're crossing genres, or even, like I said, crossing from a different kind of fantasy to contemporary stuff set on Earth, then, you know, maybe you just want to say to your fans, hey, if you want to check it out, great. If you're a fan of, you know, maybe like I would say if you're a fan of Ilana Andrews or some of the contemporary Patricia Reed people, maybe check it out. But if you don't read those guys, this may not be for you. And the same thing, I want to do a space opera series. Not, you know, I kind of have the sci-fi romances going on under the pen name, but I actually want to do a space opera series under my own name eventually. That's a little more serious than the romance stuff, and I'm just gonna say like, hey, it's out. If you want to check it out, go ahead. But if you don't read sci-fi, no problem. I don't want to pressure you into it, because I have definitely found that there are some people that will follow you and read anything you read, and they're awesome. Those are your true fans, you know. But there are some people like, you know what, this is their series, and they're just, they don't want to jump genres or try the other stuff. So if you do try to coerce your people into reading something really different, then maybe you won't kind of get as high of a review average as you're hoping to. So just something to be wary of.
Yeah, I was thinking if I did it, it would probably be changing genres there. Because I've been doing high fantasy. I was like, well, I'll try something sci-fi or maybe mystery or something. But I don't know. It's something for somewhere down the line there, but it's something I've been toying with back and forth there. But okay, so I think my question here is the last one we have here. You mentioned that if you're jogging, God Almighty, jogging really, but jogging on a treadmill, that's a good time to actually work on a book or to jot down ideas or whatnot. I mean, like for instance, give an example. My wife does a lot of traveling. She goes down to Phoenix a lot, and every once in a while I'll go down there with her. And if I don't take my laptop, I've got my iPad Air with a little Bluetooth keyboard set to it, and I've got it synced with a handy dandy little app on my laptop, so I can always just have a current copy of my book and I can work wherever. So I was just wondering, since that's important to me, then do you guys do the same sort of thing?
I try to make sure that I can have my stuff available everywhere I am. It was easier before I did Scrivener because I only have one copy of Scrivener. Eventually I'll throw down the extra $40 and have an extra copy someplace, but I make sure all of my files are available. If I sat down at a friend's computer that like I never had anything on, I have means to write on my stuff, and the 3 things that I use for that: Dropbox, I use for just everything saved into a Dropbox.com. If you've never heard of it, everyone should use it. It's fantastic. It just syncs one of the folders on your computer to the cloud and then syncs it from the cloud to that folder on any other computer or on your phone or on your tablet. I love it. Google Drive / Google Docs is another one, and it's stored on the cloud, and you can access it through anything with a browser and type on it. I have written full novels in Google Docs. And then OneDrive, which is basically Microsoft's version of those 2 things combined. It's just a synced folder on your computer that syncs to the cloud and to the other computers, and also you can access it with apps. So if you have an Android phone and you have you can get Office to Go on your phone, and you can type on your phone. So I absolutely agree that having your stuff available no matter where you are is very important. Plus, all the stuff I just said also prevents you from losing any of your files because they're synced to the cloud, and if every computer you own explodes, you'll be able to get a new computer and download the whole folder down again, and you'll be fine.
Have you had that problem before?
I have had some really remarkable computer failures in the past. No actual detonations, but I've managed to destroy a RAID drive, which is supposed to be redundant.
All right, I've had a MacBook crash too, and they were able to get my information back. I had to pay extra because I didn't have a backup drive. That was fine, but I was out of business for at least a week or so, even though I paid for the speedy service. So now I have a backup drive that I always have plugged in, and I do the same as Joe. I put stuff in Dropbox periodically just in case my house catches fire and both my backup drive and my laptop were out of commission or something. So I do that for safety reasons. And yeah, Jeff, I totally, I write on my laptop, so I can pretty much take it whenever I take a trip or anything. It's really easy. I've used Google Docs before, specifically when aforementioned laptop implosion happened. I did like a half of a novella that way, even though I prefer Scrivener. That worked for that. And yeah, when I jog only briefly. I'm like a minimum. I like do my 2 miles at the gym and weights like twice a week. And but usually I'm out hiking with my dogs because I live next to the national forest, and I will just do the Notepad app on my iPhone, and I finally learned to use the speaker thing instead of just the voice recognition instead of typing, because I usually get hit in the head with branches and stuff when I'm like. So the only thing with fantasy and sci-fi, though, is the voice recognition is not going to recognize half of the things you say. So I've done this thing where I'm like, instead of just saying the guy's name, I'm like, that guy who is the commander of the air squadron, because I know it can actually spell those things and get the notes right. But yeah, I'll scribble it on the notes whenever I get a good idea. And I've even been known to do it in the bathtub. So if I'm jogging, I'll just stop and write down my idea. And that's usually kind of the beats for me of what becomes, figuring out what those next 2 scenes are. So when I sit down, I know exactly what I'm going to write. And I forgot one other tip I wanted to give people that I've heard other people do, and I've definitely found it to be true too, is that when you are on a roll and you're just rocking it and you're kind of getting towards the end of the day, leave in the middle of a scene. So the next day you start out, you already see all this stuff that you're like, yeah, I know exactly what's going on. I think my OCD, I have that OCD nature that wants me to like neatly and tidily finish up for the day, but then it's kind of harder the next day when you're just looking at a blank page of the next new scene. So there's one extra last tip, throwing it in there.
What's the matter? You don't want to sit there and think for the next 15 to 30 minutes going, where was I going with this?
Well, usually my outline's good enough that I can figure out, but it's just easier to go, oh yeah, I was in the middle of writing that scene and I totally know what happens. It's easier to get started. I do not, however, recommend stopping in the middle of a sentence, because you will come back the next day and have no idea how that sentence was supposed to finish. So
that has happened to me far more times than I would like to admit.
Something happens sometimes and you have to leave the computer and then you come back and you're like, I don't know.
Like dogs come in, start barking, that sort of thing.
That never happens here. All right, well, if you guys don't have anything else to add, I guess we talked for longer than I thought we would, so hopefully something helps somebody out there. I think that's about all we've got for today.
All right.
That's all for me.
Yep, I'm all done too, so long, everybody.
All right, bye-bye, and thanks for listening. We're at marketingsff.com, and we may even have a contact form soon if you want to send us a suggestion or something to talk about on the show. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.